Well, salute to everyone, and welcome to the Sunday edition of Virtual Mentoring. It's great to have Ellie with us in the zone, and
Hello.
everybody who's watching us either live or on the recording. And today we're wrapping up our conversation that we've had for the past 2 weeks about supporting independent learners. If you've been with us, you know that last week we had a lot to say. Thank goodness we had a lot to say, particularly on Saturday. I couldn't be here on Sunday, but Ellie thankfully could, and that was a great conversation. I haven't listened to all of it, but I listened to some, and you guys had some great things to say. Yesterday was short and focused, and we were specifically focusing on the needs of difficult combinational classes. I told the story of my current Latin 3 and 5 class, which is a combination I never had before of just 3s and 5s. And then Chris was talking about his 2s and 3s, and we talked about the particular difficulties of working with a class where some kids are still novices and some kids are moving towards intermediate mid, and the challenges of creating collaboration both within the groups and across the groups, which was kind of where we were. Yesterday. It was a short hangout because Chris had to leave and nobody else had very much to say, so I don't know what's going to happen today, but the beauty of this is that we don't ever have to know what's going to happen, and yet we always end up learning so much and having such a great time together. So that I find really, really exciting. What I said in the description this week, as I look back at that so that I make sure that I don't lie to people about what I said we were going to do, but what I said we were going to talk about specifically were some things about independent learners that we hadn't talked about before. Do you have a student who wants or needs an independent study experience? I mean, sometimes we have those. Do you have friends who want help as they're, quote, teaching themselves Latin as adults? We've all probably had that one friend. In fact, I saw that one friend this morning. He's a philosophy professor at the university here, and he'd taken, Latin in high school, some Latin in college. Now he's closing in on retiring from actively, teaching, but he's a philosopher, he's an ancient philosopher, and his real interest is that he wants to read Lucretius in Latin before he dies. So he's working up to Lucretius with Augustine, which I think is an interesting combination. So periodically he'll grab me and say, Justin, am I right about this word? And I'll say, yes, Richard, you're right about this word. Or, no, Richard, what case is it? Oh, it's accusative. Oh, I see. So all these, we all probably know somebody who's, learning or relearning Latin and they want our help. Do you have that one student, because most of us do, that one student who's in the right level? I mean, they're taking Latin 1 and they really are a beginner, but they're really significantly faster than the rest of the class, or they're really significantly slower than the rest of the class. Most of us have probably had that experience where most of our students are kind of clustered and getting things at roughly the same pace, but there's that one kid who just moves a lot faster and needs something extra, or there's that one kid who they get it, but they get it like 2 weeks after everybody else does. And those are all situations where it's not the kind of supporting independent learners that you need in a difficult combination class, but it's also a case of kids who are doing some or most learning independently, or in the case of those adult learners, they're doing most of or all of their learning independently, but yet they come find you, they grab you when you see them. I go to church with Richard and his wife, and so Richard grabs me during coffee hour after the service and says, Justin, am I right about this translation from Augustine? And I'm thinking, really, Richard, really? But no, I mean, I'm happy to help him with that. But, so we all have these situations where it's maybe not the typical thing that you think of when you think of independent learners, but there are people who are learning independently who are relying on us in some way to foster or help foster their learning. Ellie, do you have any students that are like significantly faster or significantly slower than the rest of the class?
I have a couple who are significantly faster, but it's not a huge proportion. And then I have a fair number who are much slower. just spread out over my classes. And it's a mixture of a couple kids who, well, one of them sleeps a lot during class despite having good intentions, just doesn't sleep at home. And I've got other ones who, for various reasons, aren't taking it super seriously. Or there's one kid who, for the past 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we started on August 27th, and from the beginning of the class, he's been intending to switch out and take an online course instead. And it turns out he can't actually do that. So suddenly he's a month behind. So those ones, and the one who's been asleep for half the class, and I definitely need to figure out what to do with them. I'm planning on starting an after school thing where I work with them, but I don't know how I'm going to get them to come necessarily. I don't know if I can require them to come or just provide food. I don't know.
Food is always good.
Yeah.
Food, if you provide me food, I'll show up for almost anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are complicated situations. I had a kid one time who I just couldn't understand why all of a sudden he was sleeping in class a lot.
In my case, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, and I just got a message from somebody who said that they couldn't get in from the one page, so I put the invitation link, and hopefully that will work. Otherwise, a person who can watch. But my one student, actually I had two the same year, and they were just really nice kids. They're both boys, and they were both juniors, and they were both taking that too, and they had both been, you know, kind of typical intelligent kid who gets into B to maybe occasionally high C range because they don't like doing homework, but you know, they did everything else. All of a sudden, asleep, grades plummeting, and I was like, wait, what, whom? Well, come to find out, and this was bizarre. This was at the height of the recession. But in both cases, both parents had lost their jobs, and in both cases, my students did still have jobs delivering pizza, and they were paying the rent and the light bill. And they were working, you know, 35 hours a week in addition to going to school. So, you know, that, obviously once I knew that, and we were able to figure out some things to do, then for a while, the one kid who ended up, the parents both got jobs, but they got jobs out of state. He wanted to finish the school year at least and hopefully, you know, finish school here. His sister offered to take him in. He and his sister's boyfriend didn't get along. Sister's boyfriend kicked him out. He ended up living in his car for a while and delivering pizza and working 40, 45 hours a week delivering pizza as he was trying to save up money for a deposit on an apartment. Well, obviously, I excused him from a lot of homework assignments because, you know, what are you going to do? And I remember I had a conversation with one of his other teachers. I said, you do know what's going on with him? And she said, well, yes. She said, but he should have made better choices. You are the most suburban white lady I've ever talked to in my life. No offense meant to suburban white ladies, but, you know, because, I mean, some of my relatives are suburban white ladies. But I mean, I was thinking, really, seriously? You don't understand that this wasn't a choice? I was so upset. I was just, I was so angry. But fortunately, I then knew that he knew. I said something about, well, you know, if you need to catch up on stuff once you finish stuff for me, because he was getting pretty fast and sharp when he's, you know, able to focus on things. And I said, you know, once you're caught up, if you have a little extra time and you need to do work for, you know, some other class like Miss Such and So, and he sort of looked at me and I sort of looked at him. We kind of nodded, and then he kind of, you know, we went on from there. So you have situations like that. I mean, that's a really extreme situation. But, you know, as those of us know who don't work in advantaged suburban schools, it's often the case that you do have kids who just, they just have things going on in life that, you know, that a lot of folks just really can't imagine are happening to them, but they are.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the community where I teach. The kid in question, he just has stress-induced insomnia and doesn't get along with his step-parent. So he says he can't sleep at home. So that means that often he's asleep in class. So that's unfortunate. And then the other one, the one who was going to switch into an online class, is also going to be gone for a month because of surgeries, and he's had a bunch of surgeries and may or may not be on painkillers at any given time. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to teach you Latin, but I'll try.
Yeah, that's
so,
a challenge.
Yeah. So I need to do some kind of extra work with both of them and with other kids as well who need that kind of thing. And then since I switched to doing like a TPRS model, so much of what you learn is learned in class. And it's also going too fast for the one with insomnia.
I have a thought. I have a thought that because of a thing that I had to do for a kid in a similar circumstance, where we eventually figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit easier because I was teaching online anyway at this point, but he had something pretty serious in the medical going on, and he was out of school for about 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, because we were online, he could log in from wherever. So if he was in the hospital or if he was at home, he could watch us, but then we also recorded all the class sessions. Mm-hmm. So he could watch the recording whenever. That worked out really well, but it occurs to me that you could do that in a face-to-face, what's mostly a face-to-face environment anyway. Mm-hmm. Grab a extraordinarily cheap video camera or just your phone or somebody's phone, record just you, have a kid be in charge of recording just you. Mm-hmm. And then, so the camera's on just you and then you're getting responses. And then that way, stick the recording somewhere that the kids who have internet access can get to. And mm-hmm. then they can, then they can watch it again if they need to. And
that's a really good idea. I should do that.
Well, it just occurred to me, as I said, because for the last year and a half, I've been doing this routinely with my various online groups, because that's just a thing that we do. Mm-hmm. With the school-based online groups, that's a thing that we contractually are providing to the districts, is that we're providing them recordings so that kids can use them for review, and so that, if they want to see what we're doing, they can see what we're doing. But then with my homeschoolers, it's just a thing that I do because I do it. And I have had any number of kids, because if you are a homeschooling family and you're taking a class, once or twice a week, it might be that you're doing a really wonderful, amazing adventure, and you're not going to be around at that particular day because of that adventure. And yet you paid us for this number of classes, so I'm more than happy to record the classes so that you can see it. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, once I started doing that, I realized, you could do that face-to-face as well. When I did the national board process back in 2004, I got used to recording myself all the time because, you do that. And so it's not like, I hate recording myself, but yet I record these, right? Some of you guys are watching live, but some of you guys will be watching this not live. And I just get over the fact that I don't like the sound of my voice on recording. Oh, and I see that Nancy has joined us. Sorry, Nancy.
Hello.
Zoe.
Good to see you.
Nice. Is it just the three of us today?
I think it's just the three of us, and we've got some viewers, and then, of course, we'll have some asynchronous viewers coming up. And you, as I recall, have some students who need to do various kinds of independent things.
Oh, yes. I have a combined Latin 2 and 3 class. All three are at completely, wildly different levels. One is extremely well prepared and I think wants to take AP next year. I found out yesterday that she had in fact skipped Spanish 1 because after a couple weeks of Spanish, she decided it was too easy for her. So this is the kind of child I'm dealing with, as well as two that are just completely lost. One is nominally in Latin 3 and the other is in Latin 2. So it's a bit of a mixed group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is definitely a situation that calls for supporting independent learners, because even just with the three, you've got three totally different places. And then didn't you say that your Latin 1 group was all over the place too, in the way that Latin 1 groups often are?
Well, yes, in an interesting way. I have 3 kids who happen to be ESL. Everyone in the class has taken a language before. including that group. And but a couple of them are not as confident. There's one girl who repeatedly tells all of us that it took her 4 years to get through 2 years of French, and who seems to have a little more difficulty with some of the auditory things, but it's very, very, very bright. And just getting her to stop with the negativity and some of the others to stop with the I'm bad at languages, and kind of getting everyone on the same page attitude-wise has been a bit of a challenge so far.
There's a thing that I read in Teaching with Love and Logic that they suggested for when kids are saying, oh, I'm too dumb for this. And they suggested saying something like, aren't you glad I don't believe that? And then just walking away and letting them chew on that for a minute. Because they probably aren't used to that. So that's you could see if that works. I've never tried it, but
I like that phrase.
Yeah.
I've been doing similar things, reminding them that this is not the same class as the classes they've taken before, and that things work differently in here, that we stay positive in Latin. And I've had some success, but it's really a hard habit to break when kids are just convinced that they are bad and just terrible at something. So.
Yep.
Yeah, that negative self-talk is such a powerful thing, and it's hard to overcome. I mean, I think all of us have probably had that experience with ourselves, right? We are doing something that we don't think historically we've been very good at, and the negative self-talk starts, and it's really hard to get out of that and remind yourself that the present isn't the past, and just because I wasn't terribly good at keeping up with filing when I was, at whatever point along the way, doesn't mean that I'm always going to be bad at keeping up with filing. Although I choose filing as a thing to kind of shame myself, because I discovered in the course of getting ready to move how many things I had put in an area called to be filed. And so evidently I didn't have the negative self-talk, but I didn't have much progress either. But negative self-talk really is a thing, and it's a powerful thing, and overcoming it is hard. I love I don't know if there's anything in the world that I'm 100%, say 100% of it is wonderful and I accept it totally uncritically, but I do think that there's a lot to be said for the Love and Logic approach. I learned about it first from in the parenting context when I had I guess they were 8 and 3, and if you have two kids who are 8 and 3, that's a challenging thing. And I was a single parent, and one of the things that my ex and I decided that we wanted to do was to try to be, to have a consistent thing that we did, so that whether they were in house A or house B, that we would be like speaking the same language. And it just so happened that we discovered in the course of this the Love and Logic approach. Well, it was a huge help with parenting, but it was also a huge help with teaching, and it's just a huge help with communicating with people in general, especially if people are being difficult. So, it can be taken to an extreme, but I mean, I remember saying to a weeping child, okay, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but it really is time to leave. And do you want to leave pleasantly or unpleasantly? And he was about 3 and a half, and he looked at me and he said, pleasantly. I said, well, okay, what will that look like? And he said, I need to stop crying. And he did. And I thought, this is good stuff. I like this.
Yeah.
So, and it does apply. I mean, there's so much of that approach that does apply well in teaching, particularly, I think the core of it is building really good relationships with kids and showing them that, that you care and yet you have standards. And then once you've done that, then the techniques really kind of fall into place naturally. You can pick the ones that work.
I would like to be implementing it, but my natural mode is so sarcastic that it's kind of difficult for me it doesn't feel natural for me to do that. I have been trying some of their smaller interventions for dealing with people, I'll tap on a desk or I'll put a hand on a shoulder if I want them to wake up, rather than saying, hey, get your head up. Although I still do a lot of get your head up. There's a lot of sleepy.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's hard to you can't change your personality overnight, and you really shouldn't try to change the core of your personality. If you like the core of your personality, but I do think that the techniques are, a lot of them are really, really good. And again, I think that for me, what really helped, and this won't work for those of you guys who aren't parents, but applying it at home first made it easier to apply with students, because I could see it work. And also 3-year-olds and 8-year-olds, while they are very complex, they are complex in different ways than teenagers are complex. But with that said, for anybody who's watching who isn't yet a parent, if you work with teenagers, one of the great things is once you have teenagers, all of a sudden you know what to do with them. All your friends are like, oh, I don't know what to do with my teenager. And you're thinking, I've been working with teenagers for decades. I know exactly what to do with them. It was this 5-year-old that I had no idea, right? So just throwing that out there. But then on the other hand, 5-year-olds are naturally independent learners, and teenagers have sometimes forgotten how to be. So, they're bringing us back on topic. Well, let's see. What should we say other than love and logic? And I will, for the benefit of folks who are watching at home, I'll put a link to the Love and Logic folks, both on the Facebook page and also on the Google event page, because there's some good stuff there. And if you haven't read Teaching with Love and Logic, it is a good thing to read. And they have some good stuff online as well. Oh, thank you, Nancy. Nancy has it in the chat for the benefit of those of us who can see the chat. And I'm going to grab that link, and I'm going to open that link in the background so that I remember to put it in those two places that I said I was going to put it. Let's see. Oh, Nancy, you were about to say something, and I really didn't have anything else to say, so I'm going to stop and turn it over to you.
Oh, I was not. I just was having trouble with my connection and was trying to see if I was hearable. But we're okay.
Yes, we can definitely hear you. Okay, well, let's see. That means I need to say something else. So, so the topics that we had listed for today were students who are significantly ahead or significantly behind the rest of the class, and adult independent learners who are your friends who come to you and say, help, and students who need sort of directed study, independent study experiences for various reasons. We talked a little bit about those students who are ahead of or behind the rest of the class. And the one thing that we'd really said can work based on my experience teaching in online kinds of venues is making a recording of the class so that they can, the kid who didn't get it the first time, especially if it's a TPRS, CI kind of a thing, that they can watch it again. And everybody can benefit from watching it again. Of course, too, I mean, if it's a video recording or even just an audio recording, you can slow it down and you can pause it and you can rewind it a little bit and you can listen to it however many times you need to listen to it for it to start to sink in. And that may be a thing, and as I said, that's a thing that I do routinely online, but it's also a thing that's not that hard to do in a physical classroom, as long as you have a place to plug in your phone. But what are some other things that we can do for and with kids who are significantly behind or significantly ahead of the rest of the class?
I am at the 2 and 3 class that I described. I think that I've been getting into a better space with them, although I'm still not entirely sure about what I'm doing. I have gone back with the 2 that are just completely lost and don't seem to have grasped even most basic Latin 1 topics. And we're going back to the beginning of Orberg, doing things together. I have the other student writing dialogues for them. I have not yet looked at her first dialogue, but I'm almost certain it will be very good. We'll be using that in class next week. However, I then worry about her. I mean, we have 45 minutes to an hour a week, supposedly, that we can meet outside of class, but we are only just now getting into that rhythm. It's in the evening. There's been no accommodation to work to get her out of class for an equivalent amount of time, and so I don't even know if this is workable or what I can do. I just know that for the first couple weeks she was bored to death, and the other two were lost, and I keep adjusting for them, but I don't know if I'm doing it right.
Well, I mean, that sounds like, and we have talked a little bit about this outside of this setting, but you know, based on what I've heard there, it really does sound like you're doing about the best thing that you can possibly do with her, in that she's, you know, she is going to be making some progress by doing the writing. Another thing that just occurred to me that I've had advanced students do, we talked about this a little bit last Saturday, I think, was it with Alan? Somebody was here last Saturday, and we were talking about this, and I suggested this thing that I've done a couple of times, where the more advanced student or students choose something that they're really, really interested in, and read something in Latin that's about that, and then do the kind of thing that you're having your advanced student do, Nancy, where they make a dialogue, or they make a simplified story, or they make a whatever for the other students to read. And so that way they're still getting to read some stuff that's on level for them, but then they're also, they have a, you know, and then they're getting to use all of the grammar and vocabulary that you want them to use, and they're making something that has a real immediate audience and fills a real need, and that also builds community within the classroom. So I think, I mean, it really sounds like you're doing that with the dialogues. I think the only thing that if she gets bored with just doing dialogues based on what they've read, that, you know, doing dialogues or simplifications based on things that she can read that she's interested in might be another additional thing to look at, you know, in the next, whenever she's ready for it. Did I explain that at all? Because I feel like I just said a bunch of words and I didn't really explain things clearly at all.
I think that made sense. You know, she's ready. She did fine with the Eutropius at the beginning of Ecce 3. She's really ready for meaty stuff as far as translation goes. And I think a lot of the problem is we just don't have as much time as I would like, especially since the other two are so far behind. I mean, it's a challenge to get them to remember very basic things. I go over it and over it and over it, and I don't see much moving the needle at all. And believe me, I'm looking, and they're sweet kids. One of them, you know, has a habit of falling asleep in class, and certainly not for any of the circumstances that both of you described earlier. I mean, this is because this girl does way too much and doesn't sleep enough at night, and so I'm a little frustrated with the situation. I do think something like that can work for the girl who is ahead, and I'm certainly trying these things out. But then just dealing with what's going on with the two who are so behind is a challenge, and then sort of a distraction in getting done what I actually feel capable of getting done.
And that is really frustrating too, when you know what could be happening, and then you're looking at what is happening, and it's not really anybody's fault. It just happened. Ellie, you were about to say something, and
I was going to say that in terms of finding yourself with students who are supposed to be Latin 3 or Latin 2 or whatever, and finding that they can't particularly do a lot of things you expected them to, I have had that experience as well. I think this is your first time teaching these students, right? It's not they're coming from a different teacher. Is this true?
This is true, yes.
Okay, so it's important to remember that it is not your fault that they don't know what you would like them to know, and also that it's your responsibility to take them from where they are to where they can be. It's not your responsibility to take them, or hang on, that's not a good way of putting it. Sometimes you have to sort of figure out what you have to look at them and think about what is this kid capable of getting through this week. And it's very frustrating because you want to be able to actually do Latin 2, Latin 3 stuff with them, but it may be that right now they can focus on doing one clause sentences with accusatives and nominatives. But if you can get them good at doing that, then you can add natives or something. And even if you have to be working at a Latin 1 level and you don't think you should have to be, I guess I'm saying maybe resign yourself a little bit to it, and it's the way it is, and you can't fix how they've learned before. You can't force them to remember things, so you got to find a way to be okay with starting from where they're at and aiming for as far as you can, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
Which totally makes sense.
Yeah, but it's hard to get your head around that because you're like, why are you even in Latin 3? Right?
When I think the frustration is I've sort of gone through those stages and I'm willing to accept, but then figuring out at this point how to model for them how to study so they can at least learn the very basic things that I'm introducing again.
Okay.
And
so
that I'm introducing in a way that... sorry?
As this stuff, is it things like charts, or is it grammar concepts, or is it both, or what's something that you've been trying to work on teaching them recently?
Well, I've been scaling back further and further.
Yeah, I understand that feeling.
Yes, and I'm okay with that. We started out with some Hyginus. I thought that this would be simple enough. I did a bit of background and then set them to work on it, and it was very clear. We ended up going through a couple of readings that none of them, even the girl who is extremely proficient with the language, were capable of, at this point with their background, they just did not have the mythological background, and so all of the names were confusing them. So plus the language was a problem, and I had them do we did a review of just nouns, really just first through third declension. The most advanced student led one of these reviews. We had a quiz, complete. One did fine, and her problem seems to be connecting chart type things with actually using them. The other student had what I'd never seen before, actually. She had garbled some fifth declension endings and put them in the section for the first declension. I don't even know how this happened. But so I thought, okay, so this is a consistent problem. The one student can't even... It was tough for her to tell the difference between a singular and a plural, much less going down what's in the rest of the chart. So I had decided eventually, after trying a few things, trying some stuff that was, I thought, a little bit below where I even thought they were, not even where they should be, but where I thought they were, and eventually settled on starting at the beginning from Orberg, and really, really de-emphasizing any sort of, here are these charts, memorize them, and here's how we use them. So I had hoped that this would help. We are in the third chapter. We ended up doing the dialogue that we had done on Tuesday. My class meets two blocks a week and then 3 blocks on the alternating weeks. We ended up redoing the same dialogue because they just couldn't remember anything, and they hadn't completed the homework because they were confused. But there's a lot of groundwork that's missing in a lot of ways.
So what kinds of homework have you been trying to give them, or how have you been I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out because it does sound like a strange situation because it's yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I had them do was I asked them to read over the last few lines of the dialogue that we had not finished. We were very close to the end. To read over the dialogue itself. And then just do the first pensum. And this was not... And I asked them for 5 of the Latin questions at the end that they could just pick 5 and locate Latin text in the dialogue that would help them answer those questions. And I think, honestly, so they had attempted to do the homework, but one, and I'm working from photocopies right now since I was testing this Orberg idea out, and we all have copies of Ecce. And one of them had done the exercise from the previous chapter that was on the first page of the packet, even after going over that whole section in class and saying...
There's nothing you can do about not being able to find a page number. Yeah, at that level, you're just like, guys, how are you here?
Right, and I had not given...
Yeah, sometimes you just
in their defense, I had not given a page number. However, it was the only exercise that we'd worked on in this entire packet. It was the first exercise that we worked on. I said and wrote, do the ones for this chapter.
Right.
And then the other one had done... She'd managed to mess it up another way. I forgot exactly what she did, but it was... Oh, there was a second chapter in the packet, and she'd gone all the way to the end of the packet and tried to do it.
That's just confusing.
Yes, and
That's not
I was
even
also...
a Latin problem.
I know, and it's frustrating. This is the same girl who falls asleep, and she's extremely conscientious, but to the point where she cannot follow directions. So she's the type of kid that you assign a 2-page paper, she'll turn in something that's 8 pages long. This is an issue, across the board. So, I don't want to hog the time with my sob story.
That's okay.
But this is a very challenging situation, and I think to a certain extent I've gotten some validation for the techniques that I've been trying, and it's just, maybe even looking at this on a week-by-week basis. So I had Latin on Friday, so I have my Latin classes this Tuesday and Thursday. I have 2 periods. It's actually an odd week because 2 of the 3 girls are out of my class on Tuesday. So I have some time with one of them, and then the other 2 are coming each for an hour in the evening. And then I have a full class on Thursday. So what do I do this week to move the needle? Not as worried about the girl who's more advanced. I can, we're meeting that extra time. I think we'll be okay. I've got something for her to do on Thursday. But what do I do with these other 2 that just will push them a little bit this week and that will communicate them what they need to be doing outside of class besides filling in whatever homework I assign?
I think maybe you have to just sit and you actually have to model, like, this is how we study vocab with flashcards. This is how we study charts. Maybe something like you have to literally model how to do it. And you'll probably have to do it a lot of times. One thing that a friend suggested to me that my kids actually really liked was starting class or at some point during class using big index cards, because they make them that are, I don't know, they're like 6x4 or something, using big index cards or PowerPoint and doing flashcards together as a class. Because even if you can't make them do flashcards at home, or if they end up studying Swahili instead because they're confused, if you leave them to themselves, at least they'll get some reps in, some prep, some studying in during class, and then perhaps also that'll show them how to be studying at home. And since you have three kids in the same class, is this true?
Yeah,
and that's it. Okay. So yeah. you can have them make the cards for each other. You can have them, since there are so few, you can have them sort of cooperating and quizzing each other on things. Particularly with your 2 lower kids, if you want to spend some time with the higher kid, doing some reading or going over things with her, you can say, all right, Sarah and Billy, here are your flashcards. I want you to practice quizzing each other. And they'll probably do it. You might have to keep them on track a little bit, but the kids do usually like to quiz each other, particularly if you let one of them write on the board. That will make them happy. So have them doing stuff like that. Give them independent work to do together or partner work to do together, and that'll give you a second to check in with the other one.
And that is what I'd hope to do, to have more time to check in with my third girl in class. And the frustration over the last several classes has been I've planned it out so I can have that sort of split thing going on. And then they have been so absorbing of my time because I couldn't figure out things that they could do independently at all. And so that is one idea, at least with the flashcards, I can have them. And one, I think, one's a new student. I teach at a boarding school. She's come in from a public school, and she seems to like me, but she has some, she kind of wants to stare out the window the whole time. And the other student, again, is more conscientious and could help keep her on track, but they've been so lost that coming up with enough activities that they could do semi-independently or with me just checking in every several minutes has been a challenge.
Yeah, I would say, so do that, and then if you can take the time to do it, do they have devices or computers they can use? They have phones?
Yeah. They do.
Okay, so what I would do is I would take some of those Pensa from Orberg, and I would make them into a Kahoot or a Socrative quiz or something. And I would say, "Ooh, we have a special thing for you here to do, and you get to use your phones," and their little faces light up, at least in my experience. Thank God I get to hold it. And have them do the Pensa on there, because if it's a quiz like that, they can't screw up which ones to do. And they get immediate feedback, and they can redo it if they need to. And they really, I cannot express enough how much they like using their phones to do stuff. And Socrative has like a little rocket race where they can race against each other and see who can get more right answers quicker. And if it's just two kids, it might be friendly enough that it could be okay. I don't know. I think doing something like that, trying to give them things you might give for homework, but make it impossible for them to do the wrong homework. Also, I would suggest possibly lowering your expectations. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but lowering your expectations for correctness. This has been something that's really hard for me because I always want to correct, like, if they translate something and they use have instead of had or whatever, and it's clue perfect. I don't know if you're doing this, but like, sort of maybe let some of those errors that don't actually interfere with the meaning of it go by, and focus on, oh no, that actually means person, not microwave. Focus on the errors that like really matter, as opposed to the errors that we as grammar people are like, no, it's vitally important that you know that that's clue perfect and not perfect. But for them, you just want to get them that feeling of going through a text and having it mean something without worrying about every little detail. So I guess that's two completely different suggestions.
No, and that makes sense. And I guess to piggyback on that last thing, I have already seen some of that and have tried not to overcorrect. However, I'm also dealing with two kids that are just not confident in what they know. Yeah. They think they're bad at this, and so they don't, like, even getting them to give me answers in the first place is a challenge.
Okay, for that, I would suggest a couple things. One is, if there is something that they can read easily, like if they can do that first chapter, the second chapter of Orberg without trouble, write something modeled on it. Maybe write like something about their local area that's the equivalent of Roma est in Italia, Italia est in Europa. Write something like that and give it to them. Give it to them like a big scary paragraph and be like, tell you what, you sit here for 5 minutes and see how much of that you can read. And then they'll be like, wow, actually that was super easy. And when you make them compare how scary that paragraph looked versus what they were actually able to understand out of it, that will give them that ego boost. And if you keep doing that periodically, that will help. Giving them something that you know is too easy, and particularly if you make it look a little scary, because then they'll think they can't do it and then find that they can. It's amazing.
Well, this has been my trick with tutoring students who I come in with who are struggling, because of course this is my first year in the classroom, but I've tutored for years, and so I would actually take in Orberg and kids that tell me that they can't do Latin, I do the first couple pages with them with the map. And hey, look, you just read a page of Latin.
Yeah, yeah, I would
So
do
this
that.
is a new challenge in that even the first page of Warburg was a struggle for them.
Oh, heavens.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, but now that they've struggled through the first page of Warburg, it occurs to me that the first lesson in Latin for Americans is rather similar.
Mm.
And I guess I know I keep challenging everything both of you say, but my only concern with that is vocabulary is also such a struggle for them. And perhaps this is just something where I need to write my own lesson based on Latin for Americans first lesson, but with Warburg's vocabulary. Maybe that's the solution.
I wouldn't even worry about how much work it is going to be to rewrite it, because, like, again, if you make it about their local area, they'll be able to figure out the meaning based on context, because they'll know that Madison is in Wisconsin. I have no idea where you live. They'll know that Madison is in Wisconsin is in the United States. So they'll have that, plus probably have, you can also put the things that matter, like est. You can put est on the board. Est equals is, sunt equals are. Go, because sometimes you need to. Sometimes it helps to make them realize how much they do know, even if they barely know est. Maybe doing it with local material would make it a little bit more interesting for them, and also easier on you, because it's easier to write if you are just using a lot of modern words, and you don't have to worry too much about how you'd say anything very complex, and you don't have to translate Wisconsin into Latin if you don't want to, that kind of thing. My kids liked it too. One thing we did after we read the first chapter of Warburg is I pulled up Google Maps, and we talked about their town, and we looked at the lake, and I said, is there one island in the lake? No. Are there 2 islands in the lake? No. Are there 5 islands in the lake? Yes. Are there 6 islands in the lake? No. And it was the lake that we can literally see out the window in other classrooms, not in mine. And so sometimes it helps for them to be talking about something where they feel like they're on their home turf. So that's one thing. And then also in terms of feeling stupid and not wanting to answer questions, I tried this on my history class this year. I don't know if it's worked or not. I think it has. But what I said the first day is that there absolutely are stupid questions, and I intend to ask a lot of them. So I will ask questions that I know they know the answers to, or I'll ask a question and point at the answer on the board, and I'll be like, just tell me, guys, just tell me. Until they get used to answering things, and they're like, there's no point in me answering it, but it's right there, so I might as well say it. Also, I try to thank people for wrong answers every time I get one, because they say, oh man, you know what, that just reminded me. Thank you for doing that, because that's actually a really tricky thing. So let's just review how to handle that. I'm sure you know a lot of this stuff as a tutor, but sometimes when you have more kids in a group, you can do stuff. You can treat errors differently, because you can thank them for making the mistake because you know it's going to help the other students, and show them that. I mean, there's always the old thing that whatever you're thinking, someone else is thinking it too, so always just ask your question. But and they've heard that a million times, but they haven't heard thank you for a wrong answer a million times.
Well, that's really important. I think thanking kids for wrong answers. Also, excuse me, earlier when you heard that loud creaking sound, I was going and grabbing a copy of Latin for Americans that I hadn't packed yet off of the shelf, and looking at it and comparing it to my memory of the first couple of pages of Warburg, and there really isn't any different vocabulary.
Oh, excellent.
So I think it's short. The first lesson, it's called Roma et Italia. Roma est in Italia. Italia est in Europa. Britannia est in Europa. Britannia est insula. So it's really very similar, but of course it's in a slightly different order. So I think you could probably just grab a copy of that and possibly rewrite a little bit of it, but show them that in fact, oh look, I really can read this. And it's really exciting for kids to say, oh, I really can read this, oh, I can really read that. Then once they've worked with the family words, you give them the first few stories from Cambridge, because that's all family vocabulary places. You can give them the first some more from early in Latin for Americans, which is again going to be all family in places. I'll put in a little plug for the first few lecciones of the Tres Columnae project because, again, it's all families and places.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they get reps of the vocabulary, but in a slightly different context. And that does often tend to help.
Yes. So that makes a lot of sense.
For the family names too, what I've been doing, what I'm doing is I'm like trying to preview stuff before we hit Orberg and using Orberg at the end. But I've been doing a lot of talk about family members within their own families, but also I've had a family tree of the gods, a very simple one, drawn on my board for a while. And one thing that always gets their attention is when they notice, like, okay, Jupiter and Juno are sister and brother, but they're also husband and wife. And so you can be talking about them, talking about the family words, and when you say, okay, soror uxor Ioes est Juno, and they'll be like, whoa, soror et uxor. And the fact that they may have understood that, and they may be so confused and surprised by what they thought they heard, and then realize it's right. I don't know, that could work if you end up wanting to do that, because it's interesting material that's weird and surprising, so they think, surely I got that wrong. And then you tell them, no, you're right, it's the Greeks who are weird. And yeah, I don't know, those are some thoughts.
Oh, I like that. Thanks.
I really like that idea as well. Yeah, so it sounds like we really are, oh, look what we've been able to accomplish.
Oh, you know what, Nancy? Sorry, Justin. What is it? Miriam Patrick and Rachel Ash just put out a little $6 book that I've forgotten the name of, but you've seen it if you're on Best Practices.
Yes, I ordered it. Amazon Prime Santa brought it to me the other day.
Good. Yeah, so it seems off topic, but I promise it makes sense. My husband hasn't taken Latin for 12 years since high school. And one day he was doing something, working on his car or whatever, and I was like, I will read this Latin book to you because I'm obnoxious. And so I stood there and I read the whole book to him and followed it. And he got it just fine. So I would suggest maybe working with them on that, because it is the same vocabulary over and over again. And sure, there's some weird bits with indirect statement and whatever, but you can work through those together, and there will be a story, and maybe having the story to follow will be easier than, I mean, it is a very simple story, and it's very, like, the action moves extremely quickly, so maybe it'll be a little more satisfying than Orberg. But I don't know. The testimony of my husband, who has not done Latin in a very long time, I think that's pretty good. He could understand what was going on, and perhaps even your students who cannot understand which page is which will be able to get something. Poor babies.
And I'm hoping so. I might end up using Orberg for a bit more.
Oh, use both, absolutely.
You know, and of course not, drop Orberg, but then use that. I had thought about using it, and because what does seem to work well for them, we went through that first dialogue, which frankly, I mean, in the actual dialogue there isn't that much. It's mostly people saying la la, but I had them read the text around it and act things out. We got up, and there seemed to be, at least by the second reading, a bit more understanding. So hopefully that incorporating the kinesthetic will help as well.
Oh, and if you're interested in doing that kind of thing, and they're doing well with dialogues, there's a thing that I learned about from TBRS, which is readers' theater, where basically you have them act out the story or whatever it is, and then you have them act it out again. You say, but this time, do it like a horror movie. Do it like an action movie. And it works double best if you put on some YouTube, like, generic horror music or something. That seems to work a lot better. Really get into it sometimes, and it forces them to hear it and listen to it and think about what it means just one more time. So that's one thing you can do. If they work well with the dialogues, then do that by all means, and that should help a little bit.
Oh, thank you. That's a great idea.
It's super fun too. Like, I'll do it and I'll be like, why am I playing? I'm supposed to be at work. Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
Oh, another thing that my kids love, and they get to use their phones, and they think this is the coolest thing in the world, is to use the Puppet Pals app if you have an iOS device. And if you have never seen the Puppet Pals app, get ready for your life to change.
I'm going to look now.
Oh, look now. Your life is going to change. I'm going to stick a link over here in the chat. Actually, one of my students introduced it to me. And, well, that's a long link. But anyway, let's see if it opens. There we go. Yes, here it is. Here's a better link. But yeah, here we go. So what it does is it's like the Harry Potter Puppet Pals videos, except there are all kinds of additional puppets that you can use. And as I said, I almost screamed with joy when my first student showed this to me a few years ago. And my life was as well complete. So very frequently I will have kids make these, and then they can upload them. And they can, well, of course, they can just show them in class, but they can also upload them to things. So, if you have an LMS, then they can upload links to it. As I recall, I think you can upload from it to stuff. I haven't played with all of its many features because it will destroy my life, and I'll spend 27 hours a day making little videos with it. But my kids have absolutely loved making videos with it, which they can then share with each other and with me, and then they can, it can be the dialogues, it can be dialogues that they wrote, it can be whatever, except that the people speaking could be, a Royal Canadian Mountie and a camel.
Nice.
And it is just fabulous.
I have real puppets too, but this seems very fun.
Well,
when I was in the physical classroom, my kids made real puppets. We made paper bag and paper plate puppets routinely as like a culminating activity for a given unit. One of the options was to make a puppet-based video. And that's how we discovered the use of this app, was that one of my kids said, Mr. Schwan, did you know that there's a Puppet Pals app? And I said, no, but I want to know that there's a Puppet Pals app. Show me this Puppet Pals app. And she showed it to me, and I said, oh, let us add this as an additional option, always and forever.
excellent. I have now downloaded it.
Yep, me too. I'm about to start playing with it.
And maybe buying all the characters this evening. Oh dear. Space.
Oh, the characters are worth buying. Yeah, go ahead and buy the characters.
Is the teacher edition any different from the pocket edition?
I don't think so. I believe that what I have is the pocket edition that we get in free. The nice stuff. I believe I just have the pocket edition because it's the one that was free. And then we got the characters. This was a family decision. Both of my kids said, Dad, you have to get this, right? And the fact that it lives I just have the pocket edition, the regular Puppet Pals too. Is the sound, you said the sound was a little bit garbled, is it better now?
Oh, it's a little clearer now.
Okay, I think I know what happened. This mic moves, and it's of a bone conducting variety, so it has to be in a particular place, but it moves. But anyway, it's now better. Hopefully, let me know if it gets garbled again. But yeah, both of my kids told me several years ago when I first got it, they said, you have to get this because we share an iTunes account, and so their point was therefore, we're going to get this as a result. And then we had to get all the characters. Because, yes, you have to get all the characters.
So excellent.
Okay, so now we may need to be playing Puppet Pals. Although we should keep talking if we have further things to talk about. I forget why we even got on this. Oh, for retelling stories, that's right.
Yeah, for retelling stories. Because one of the great things is that the more often that in different ways that kids retell stories, the more they recycle the vocabulary, not just in isolation and lists, but in a meaningful context. And, you know, I mean, it's like rereading, but of course, kids hate rereading. So what you have to do is to provide them with the vocabulary, but in a different context or in a different arrangement or a different story or with different characters or with somebody exploding or with getting to make it into Puppet Pals or whatever, so that they're willing to do the work, or, you know, willing and able to do the work of rereading, which is the work that they need to do in order to get better at whatever the thing is. Also, I promise I'm not going to play with Puppet Pals right now. That's not why I turned off my video. It isn't. It isn't. Don't listen to the music in the background. I'll turn my video back on so that I can be accountable for not playing with, just don't watch what my hands are doing.
Okay.
No, I promise I won't. And so, anyway, yeah, so we had talked about independent students, helping students be independent when they're like significantly ahead of or significantly behind the rest of the class. And I think we've got a pretty good set of strategies for that. The other thing that occurred to me, because we probably all know that person, is our friend who knows some Latin or wants to learn some Latin, or used to know some Latin, or was our friend in that high school Latin class, but then we ran into them and they say they haven't done Latin in forever, but now they want to again. And they want to know, can you help me, or can you give me tips and suggestions for how to do this? What kind of tips and suggestions can we give those adult learners? This is a live thing for me right now because of my friend that I was describing at the beginning, who's working through Augustine right now, and then he's going to do Lucretius after that. And his Latin is quite good, but he does sometimes, you know, snag me and ask me, and I'll get these plaintive emails, the occasional phone call, usually just when we see each other. He'll say, Justin, do you have a minute? And I'm thinking, okay, you're either going to tell me a really, really obscene joke that's really funny, which he's also very good at, or you're going to ask me some question about some piece of Augustine that, you know, I've never read, and that you're going to be mostly right about, but that you've misinterpreted one word, except I'm looking at this word and thinking, I wonder what Augustine meant by that. So what are some ways that one, I guess I'm asking for advice. They probably should join the Learning Latin Facebook group. That's great advice from Ellie. Although the Learning Latin Facebook group frustrates me because sometimes they just start fighting about, well, they fight about the same thing.
It gets really dumb really quick sometimes, but you can ignore those, and it is a good place to go for questions about grammar. So if it's also, there's a lot of people who are into more Christian type texts and later Latin type texts than you'll find in a lot of Latin groups. At least I find that. So if he's interested in Augustine, then it's probably a pretty decent place to find people who have also spent time reading stuff that's actually kind of in that genre and might know more about the specific vocabulary and stuff meant in that kind of thing than one of us might.
Oh, that's a good idea. I will send him that way, although
yeah, warn him there's a couple crazy on there, but you can block them.
Yeah, he has disdain for Facebook, but his wife uses Facebook all the time, so maybe she could, I think his disdain for Facebook means I don't know how, but I think that his wife could probably show him, okay. And like get him along there and show him how to join the group. And then, you know, because once you join the group, it's not that hard to do. That is a really good suggestion. I appreciate that, because that was what was on my mind as the thing that I wanted to ask for help with, because, you know, I can help him like with the details of the Latin usually, but what I can't necessarily think of is where can I send him for just the more general kind of help and support. And the Learning Latin Facebook group really is a great resource, except when they start fighting about, is it there that they're fighting about ontological and teleological interpretations of Catullus 76 right now?
I don't even know because I don't read it when it gets like that. But there's the one guy who thinks he's a Roman. It's a bit weird. Anyway.
Yeah, somebody had asked a question, a perfectly reasonable question about like grammatical stuff at the start of Catullus 76, and a person came in with this just bizarre, random. Well, don't you think that this is, you know, sort of a you know, this sort of existential, philosophical cry? And thinking at the start of Catullus 76, really? But so then they started fighting about that.
Oh dear.
But the vast majority of posts on there either can you correct my tattoo or can someone explain the grammar in this passage from some random life of a saint. So I suspect it's a good place if you're reading Augustine and you need some help. They are like that.
Yeah, they really are, and it's kind of discouraging. Oh, and then occasionally you have a student who's discovered it, and it's like, can someone help me translate this random sentence that I found? And you're thinking, oh no, that's a random sentence. That's from exercise such and so on page such and so of Cambridge. Go away. But there are many people who tell those people to go away. Sometimes rather meanly.
Mm.
Well, I suppose the one piece that I have to speak to this is at where I went to undergrad, there was a really wonderful man he's a retired doctor, had done a classics degree at Harvard back, I think, in the early 60s. And so he was one of the professors, I suppose he had contacted him a few years back. And so we provided space and let this guy organize a reading group. And so it ended up being students, professors, random members of the community who could read Greek. And I don't know, so perhaps suggesting that sort of thing to someone like him might be a good thing and give you an outlet on the side as well, if you wanted to be plugged back into some texts that you aren't teaching.
Oh, that's an excellent idea. I love that idea.
And having organized a Latin reading group in the past, because I did one my senior year, and having to do all the legwork for that, if you have someone else who will do it for you and who can lend their enthusiasm and organizational skills to that, that's always a bonus.
Yes, anything that doesn't involve you or me in our extensive spare time having to do the organizing of this thing is probably a very, very good idea. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you all. You know, somebody once said to me a couple of weeks ago, they said, Justin, you've been so helpful, but we don't feel like we're helping you. I said, oh, don't worry, you will. And now I've gotten so many great ideas from you guys that it's just fantastic. And things that I can really help my friend with, which is going to be great. He was busy today at the brief moment that I thought we would have talked, but I'm sure that he'll grab me in an upcoming week and say, I need help with such and so. So let's see. Are there other things that we should talk about for the good of our group, or should we declare that we have had a wonderful session and that we should go about the rest of our day?
Sounds good.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you to everybody who's been watching and everybody who did participate. Oh yes, thanks Ellie for the suggestion of text kit. There is, and it is good. And depending on which of the subforums you join, it's very active. And I hadn't even thought of suggesting that he look there, but I will. So that's really wonderful. So again, thanks to everybody. I'm not sure what my schedule is like next week. I may or may not be available, but if I'm not, I'll get with somebody and ask them if they can host this, or you know, if nothing much comes up on the idea exchange by Wednesday, we could always just take the week off like we did that one time.
Sounds great.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to say volete omnes, volete sodales, volete amicae, since I can say that today, since you all aren't a mixed group to me. And we'll see each other, and also volete amici to the folks who are watching live. And we will see each other the next time, and thank you so much for being part of this.